Okay. Okay, everyone. Hi to the audience, hi to all the attendees listening to us in GatherTown. We are ready to go with the public roundtable on AI governance. We have all of our associations lined up, so the GovLab, the Future Society, the Tech Policy Lab. We remind you that basically we're going to introduce the associations. We're going to let each of them talk and present their work for around 5 minutes, but 5 to 6, because we have some more time today. And then after that, we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. So do please paste your questions in the chat that you see at the bottom left on GatherTown. And we have someone from our team making sure to sort of build a bridge between GatherTown and Zoom so that you can always make sure that we listen to your questions and we report them to the speakers. Feel free to both have open questions for each association or also questions that target one association specifically. We can just see which format of question works best. Okay. So welcome everyone. Welcome to all the 3 associations as well, to the GovLab, to the Future Society, to the Tech Policy Lab. I'm just going to introduce each association very briefly. And then, so I'm going to first go with the GovLab, the Future Society, and then the Tech Policy Lab. And I think we can respect this order as well with the presentations, if you're all right with that. Okay. Okay, so general presentation for each association. The GovLab. The GovLab's mission is to improve people's lives by changing the way we govern. Their goal is to strengthen the ability of institutions, included but not limited to governments, and people to work more openly, collaboratively, effectively, and legitimately to make better decisions and solve public problems. They believe that increased availability and use of data, new ways to leverage the capacity, intelligence, and expertise of people in the problem-solving process, combined with new advances in technology and science, can transform governance. They approach each challenge and opportunity in an interdisciplinary, collaborative way, irrespective of the problem, sector, geography, and level of government. And then the Future Society. The Future Society is an independent, no-profit think and do tank. Their mission is advancing the responsible adoption of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies for the benefit of humanity. Their activities include policy research, educational and leadership development programs, advisory services, seminars and summits, and other special projects to advance the responsible adoption of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. And then we have the Tech Policy Lab. The Tech Policy Lab is a unique interdisciplinary collaboration at the University of Washington that aims to enhance technology policy through research, education, and thought leadership. It was founded in 2013 by faculty from the university's Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering, Information School, and School of Law. And the lab aims to bridge the gap between technologists and policymakers and to help generate wiser and more inclusive tech policy. So here is a general introduction of all the 3 associations. We also have a link to their website on our conference website. So please go and click on them if you're curious. And now I open the floor to them and to their presentations. The GovLab, please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Martha, for having us, and delighted to be here together with our colleagues, Nicolas and Maria. And my name is Stephan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of GovLab, and I'm here today with Andrew Young, who is the knowledge director of GovLab and has been at GovLab since its initiation and is working with me on all programs related to data and artificial intelligence. And what we will do in the 6 minutes or 5 minutes, Martha, that you have given us to highlight some of the areas that we're working on, I will briefly touch base on a few areas. Andrew will share some screens of the websites that where more information can be found, and then subsequently, I think looking forward to engage with all of you in the Q&A where Andrew will also have an opportunity to then reflect on some of the issues that we have worked on together. And as already mentioned, Marta, GovLab, our mission is to really look into how do we improve the way we make decisions, leveraging new technologies and new science. And surprise, surprise, one of the areas that, of course, we have looked into is how data and subsequently artificial intelligence can be used in a responsible way to improve the way we go about making decisions. And that has meant that we have focused mainly in the AI space on three big areas. And of course, there's more than that, but I will mainly focus on those three areas that might be relevant for the audience today. The first area, and Andrew, if you could pull up the AI localism kind of website. The first area is really around what we call AI localism, by which we mean the area where we need to focus on governance of artificial intelligence at the local level. Too often, when we have a discussion about AI governance or AI regulation or even AI ethics, we approach it as if that only concerns at the national or even global level. But from our point of view, what is really happening is actually where cities and localities or states, for instance, within a larger federal environment, are really trying to innovate and deal with some of the challenges as it relates to artificial intelligence. And that phenomenon where cities and where localities are actually stepping up, quite often because of a vacuum of national and global guidance, is what we call AI localism. We also feel that AI localism has a unique quality because it allows for a much faster feedback loops with governance and actually the field that is affected, including citizens. And so it has a more pronounced immediacy when you govern AI at the local level than you would govern AI, for instance, at the national and local level. And so our initiative on AI localism really focuses on how can we, at the local level, steer the responsible use of AI within cities or within localities in order to improve ultimately the way cities are, for instance, managed as well. And we've developed a variety of initiatives here. One is a repository. If you click on the repository there, you will find some examples on how cities are actually governing and developing approaches to AI worldwide. But we also have a canvas in order to understand what is really happening. And the canvas provides insights in the components of AI governance, ranging from the principles that are being developed at the local level to modalities such as dealing with procurement of AI, which is, of course, an AI governance approach, to establishing new transparency modalities where you actually provide insights on what are the algorithms that are being used, for instance, for automated decision-making, to other mechanisms as well. And this is the AI Localism Canvas that we really recently published as well, and happy to anyway share with you a copy of that if of interest. The second area, in addition to AI localism, that we have developed a range of initiatives is the area what we call where AI and CI meets, by which I mean where artificial intelligence and collective intelligence meets. As I mentioned, at GovLab, we do a lot of work, not only around data, but also on how actually we can engage citizens in making decisions and co-creating solutions, which we quite often call collective intelligence. And from our point of view, artificial intelligence has actually an opportunity to make collective intelligence more rigorous, but also more agile, because in order to actually enable collective intelligence, there's a lot of transaction cost involved. And so what we have looked into is how can we actually provide AI for augmented collective intelligence so that we actually can use collective intelligence in order to govern better. But we also been looking at, and this is an example of a report that we've done where we've tried to understand what are current practices where artificial intelligence is being used to, for instance, sense what is actually the preferences and the input from citizens as it relates to governance. But we also look at it from the other side. by which we mean how can collective intelligence be used for informing artificial intelligence. And as some of you might know, there is quite an increased tendency these days, and I don't know, Andrew, whether you can share the article that appeared in AI and Society, where we introduced earlier, anyway, a few years ago, where we introduced this concept of human-driven artificial intelligence, where we actually engage with the collective in order to define the objectives for which artificial intelligence is needed. And that has become, as you might have seen, for instance, Stuart Russell and others at Berkeley have now written for human compatible AI. And that's where AI, from our point of view, AI and CI meet, where actually CI, collective intelligence, can enable AI to become more ethical because it taps into the collective wisdom on what is appropriate, what are the objectives, and so on. So that's the second area that I want to highlight of some of the work that we've been doing, where AI and CI meets. And then the third area is around AI ethics. And from our point of view, AI ethics quite often is discussed in a very narrow, cultural specific kind of environment. But from our point of view, we need to broaden the perspective on AI ethics and really have a global conversation about what does AI ethics means across the world. And so we've created this AI ethics course, Global Perspectives, where we really try to engage, and this is just the start that we show here because this is meant to grow over time, where we try to engage with a global network of experts and scholars around AI ethics in order to get their perspectives on what AI ethics means from their cultural and also quite often sector-specific environment. And so it includes people from Japan, for instance, people from Latin America, people from Africa, people from Europe, of course, and from North America, including also people from New Zealand working on indigenous data, for instance, and AI. And that's, from our point of view, the conversation that we need to have in order to quite often de-Westernize, because a lot of this conversation is quite often from a particular kind of perspective, in order to have a more global environment. And so what you see here is the website. It's a collection of online and video lectures combined with then transcripts, but also additional readings in which you can find and understand what are some of the global perspectives on the issue at hand. So those are just, Marta, three, and I didn't look at the clock, I might already have gone way over time, three areas that we have worked on, and I wanted to share just to get us started. The need for actually approaching AI governance more at the local level in order to complement what's happening at the national, at the global level, but also to see cities as labs of innovation as it relates to AI. Two, to think about how can collective intelligence make AI more human-driven, but also how can AI actually improve the way we have collective intelligence for improving governance. And then thirdly, how do we make the conversation around AI ethics more global and have a global platform where we can share some of those points of view. So these are just three areas that GovLab is working on, and happy, and I would say I will delegate some of the questions to Andrew so that Andrew also has a say, but for purposes of time, I've tried to introduce this in the best possible way, and perhaps Andrew, later on you might have some additions here as well.
Thank you so much, Stephan. And Andrew, yeah, we're looking forward also to your reply once we open the floor. No, thank you for the great presentation. I'm actually really curious now to hear from the Future Society, from Nicolas. I know they've also been working in collective intelligence, partly, if I'm correct, in the past. So there's going to be a lot of, let's say, material for a nice discussion. Go ahead, Nicolas.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Marta, and thank you for people.
Nicolas, we cannot hear you. Yeah, now we can. Now we can. Now you're back. Now we can hear you.
Sorry. Oh, okay. I didn't know you were not hearing me. So yeah, this is nice to actually be here, and then I really enjoyed the session on GatherTown as well, more interactive with everyone over there. That was quite nice. And yeah, as I don't know if that went through or if I disconnected at that time, but like I was also wanted to thank AI for People for hosting this this nice event and this good opportunity for conversation. I know, like, you know, the team is working hard, so really, like, congrats to you guys. So yeah, the future society in 5 minutes, a tall order, but I bet I could even do shorter than 5 minutes. As Marta mentioned, we are the you know, like, our mission is to advance the responsible adoption of artificial intelligence for the benefit of humanity, and this means, like, for a new technology, right? This means that we want to help society seize the opportunities and mitigate the risks that arise from artificial intelligence, right? So for those of you who were with me on the GatherTown workshop, like, some of the we discussed some of the risks, right? So the risk to the fact that it might not be aligned with what you actually wanted to do. It might not be robust to actually doing what you wanted to do in unforeseen circumstances, and it might not be corrigible. If it actually makes mistakes, you might actually not be able to fix it once it has been deployed. This is the kind of risk that we see. But in terms of opportunities, there are hundreds of opportunities, and I think this is why what has led to so much hype about artificial intelligence is all the opportunities that arise in healthcare, for the climate, in many ways, for increasing, like, efficiency gains and that kind of thing. But overall, like, to advance a bit, like, society's ability to deliver value and economic value as well, but as well as social value. So AI as a new technology can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It really depends what we mean by that. AI affects the safety, the dignity, and the prosperity of individuals, right? So it can enhance the safety of individuals, it can, you know, uphold the dignity of individuals, and it can, like, advance the prosperity of individuals. But also it can lead to totally the opposite, depending on the way we use it. So as our mission is to advance the responsible adoption of AI, right? One of the main ways that we have over the past 5 years concentrated on is like the governance of artificial intelligence, right? So governance really refers to the codes of conduct, the technical standards, the strategies, the policies, the way AI is being taught, and that kind of material that really shapes the behavior of developers and users of artificial intelligence systems. So our objective is really to make sure that these codes of conduct, these technical standards, and these policies are being developed in a way that promotes the responsible adoption of AI for the benefit of humanity. So that would really be like you know, an articulation of this. And of course, like, we have several methods. Marta, you mentioned collective intelligence. Indeed, we do use some concept from collective intelligence for our events. Back when events were you know, like, global and everyone could fly over, we would actually design our workshops in a way that can extract the most intelligent outputs from it, and that's what we did for a long time. This is now, with the pandemic, a bit more. It's a bit impeded. We also do policy research. This is a big aspect of our work. We do advisory, and we also do, like, so in addition to this events, policy research, and advisory, we also do some education components. So, for example, we are developing a MOOC right now, so a massively online open course with UNESCO to facilitate, like, legal professionals use of AI and understanding of AI as they arise worldwide. So overall, you know, as examples of to make all of this a bit more concrete, examples of the ways we are trying to help society seize the opportunities and mitigate the risk of AI is by working with the OECD, GIZ, which is the German Foreign Agency, the Global Partnership on AI, UNESCO, as I mentioned, the World Bank, the Council of Europe, among many other entities, and to develop with them projects that could really facilitate, like, a good governance of AI. So, for example, we have been working with governments in lower income countries to develop national AI policies that are you know, fostering this responsible AI while still answering to the urgency of economic development that is often the context in which lower income countries operate and lower income governments operate. We have worked, as I mentioned, with UNESCO to develop a MOOC. We have worked with the OECD to do research for them on the value chain of AI, which underpins a bit more the work of the AI policy observatory that they have developed. We have worked with the Global Partnership on AI to help them set their own agenda about what priorities they should work on. So yes, this is the diversity of work that we do. And I look forward to be talking more on this roundtable. I think that's really like a great opportunity to exchange again on all these questions with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you for presenting the work of the Future Society. And yet there are many ways, I think, where there are similarities also with other associations. So looking forward once again to the discussion. And Maria, the floor to you. I see your colleague is here as well. Feel free to, of course, to delegate in the best way that you foresee. The floor to you.
Great, Marta. Thank you very much. And thanks for having us here today. So, as Marta told you before, the Tech Policy Lab aims to bridge the gap between technologists and policymakers, and also to help generate wiser and more inclusive tech policy. So we work not only in AI, but also in augmented reality, robotics, Internet of Things, etc. When it comes to AI governance, I'm currently involved in a project that I want to tell you about, and then I think my colleague Lassana will tell you about some of the other projects he's involved in. So as part of my role as a PhD candidate at the University of Washington, but also a research assistant at the Tech Policy Lab, I have been serving for, I think now, almost 5 months as a member of the Washington State Automated Decision Making Systems Work Group. This is highly, of course, related with AI and governance, and this is a work group that was authorized by law and that was convened by the Office of the Chief Information Officer of the state of Washington. And basically what it looks, or what it aims to, is to examine how automated decision-making systems, including AI systems, can best be reviewed before adoption and also before procurement, and how can they be periodically audited in order to ensure that they are fair, they are transparent, they are accountable, and also that they do not improperly advantage or disadvantage Washington residents. So this group is composed of 27 members who come from either the departments of the state of Washington. There are also 5 representatives from advocacy organizations, such as ACLU, and there are also 2 representatives from universities and research institutions. So there is where I come into the task force. And the main purpose of the work group is to develop recommendations for change in state law and policy regarding the development, the procurement, and the use of these type of systems by public agencies in the state. The final report to the legislature and also to the governor should be ready by December 1st. So we are almost done with our work. But what I wanted to tell you about is just a little bit about what my role has been at this work group. Because what I have been doing as a researcher is providing inputs in terms of best practices of AI governance, and also what Professor Daniel Citron calls technological due process, some best practices of technological due process that we have been taking from either academic literature, law review articles mainly, but also from legislation, regulation, and policy that has been developed in other jurisdictions, both within the US and also abroad, mainly in Europe, but also in many other countries around the world. So that has been my main input. You will see that when the report is published, it will have an annex about other jurisdictions. It will also have a list of guiding principles in which we, along with other civil society and research organizations, worked on a lot. But this was a very interesting challenge and task for us, because it was working with public servants who know the reality of these systems, and also working with civil society and research organizations who know the theory about these systems. So coming to work together was a really enriching experience for us. I can tell you more when we have the Q&A, but now I think Lassana can share a little bit more of our work at the lab.
Lassana, you're muted. Here we no wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey.
Should works now.
Awesome. I was just saying good afternoon or morning or evening to everyone wherever you may be. So at the work that I do at the Tech Policy Lab is actually around trying to ensure that different voices are captured in discussions of AI and governance. And one of the projects that I lead that contributes to this goal is called the Diverse Voices Method, or Diverse Voices Approach. And through that approach, we convene different experiential groups, people who represent different communities, to provide feedback on how different implementations of AI would negatively impact their life experience, and we feed that information back to policymakers to consider as they're making decisions. Just also wanted to touch briefly, I know we have the Q&A coming up, on some of the kind of the big challenges that we've foreseen through our discussions with community members and opportunities. So in terms of AI and governance in Washington State, and I think in other localities as well, one of the greatest benefits, as was mentioned a little earlier, is kind of the economic potential and the operational efficiencies. One of the challenges that we've identified through our community members is that AI has the potential and has actually kind of reinforce social inequalities that already exist, and that no matter even if you have the perfect AI, there's opportunities for inequalities to be magnified or to occur. So dealing with that, but there's plenty of opportunities as well. And I guess in terms of addressing the challenge, though, bringing more interdisciplinary communities into the discussion has been and continues to be one of the most effective methods. We ran an experiential panel on as an example on AR some time ago, and there we convened formerly incarcerated people, women, and youth as well, to get their feedback again, just to show kind of the variety of voices we are trying to bring into conversations. I know we're over our 5 minutes, so I'll pause there and we can move on.
Thank you so much, both of you. Very interesting, like so much diverse and different work is happening. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now we can open the floor for questions. I invite the audience to keep on sending in their questions in the chat, and we keep on copy pasting them here. We already have a set of questions. I just copy pasted the first one. It's very general, probably is even a good conversation starter, yet not that easy. And we do not have to be rigid about the order with which you come in and speak. Whenever you want to sort of start off or you have a point, you can either press the reactions button here in Zoom, or you can also, I see you all, so you can also raise your physical hand, and I will take note of that. So are you ready? First question, and I invite you also to contextualize each reply to what your association is doing, of course. I guess that's helpful. So question number one, I guess, what is the most urgent challenge or risk in AI governance that your association has identified, and how is it trying to tackle it? Anyone wants to start on that? So we have Maria here, and then I think Andrew also got ready. Yes, Maria first.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, so Lassana told you briefly about the challenges that we have found in the diverse voices method. I would add that, going back to the work group I'm part of, I think that there are two challenges that we have found working as part of this group. The first one is how to reach a consensus on what systems are meant to be included in the concept of automated decision-making systems. If we should reduce them to machine-based learning and decision-making systems, or if we should include any system in a scope that uses any algorithm to make or assist in making decisions. So that was really hard while working in the work group. And I actually think that we didn't reach a consensus on that. All the recommendations that we did were on the broad term of automated decision-making systems, but we didn't dig deeper into what we meant about that. And I know personally that in the task force that was created in the city, New York City, they had exactly the same issue when working together to define this set of recommendations. So that's the first challenge, what to include in that term. And the second one is that, of course, we as research and civil society organization had very clear what were the best practices of AI governance that we wanted to be included in the recommendations. And of course, it was hard to make those recommendations compatible with the reality of public servants that were also part of the group and that are constantly facing lack of resources in terms of time, money, and personnel. So it was really hard to come to a point where we could balance like our aims and also their reality. So those are the two challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Very, very relevant. And I think also here in Europe, I do not know if Nicolas agrees, but we feel there are the same challenges with agreeing on the terms very much. Andrew is next, and then Nicolas, I saw your hand.
Thanks, Marta. So yeah, I think that a couple of quick thoughts are, in our work around all things AI and data responsibility in general, we're really working to establish new ways to both mitigate risks of misuse of data and AI, as well as risks of misuse of data and AI, in the sense of how do you identify areas where new potential harms might arise and address those from a data protection and misuse perspective, but also how do you identify opportunities where data and AI can actually create transformative public value in a responsible way and in a way that doesn't create new risks and sensitivities, and then act on those opportunities in a meaningful way. Because otherwise, if you're living in a completely kind of closed down environment where you aren't experimenting with new ways to leverage these tools, then significant public value might not be created as a result. The other challenge I think we're really trying to address through the AI localism work and the repository building in particular is the current state of fragmentation across the field and globally, where we don't have a good sense of, let alone what best practices are. We don't have a good sense of what current practice is, where we have globally efforts to create new transparency registers, to internal task forces and working groups, new forms of public consultation and training, and many, many other mechanisms that are being kind of deployed in a rapid and emerging way, which is great because that's how you find out what actually works in practice. But we need to build that evidence base and understand what the impacts and lessons learned across this broad and fragmented field is at the moment. And that's something that we're really working toward through that repository development and assessment of current practice toward evidence-based recommendations and new solutions.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing that. Nicolas, throw to you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for it's a good question, right? I'm happy to see that we all identify different challenges. This is very good that civil society is working in complementary ways. I'd like to quickly share my screen because I jotted down. I sketched a quick thing on my. I do that on Signal now. So basically, like just to explain, what picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't know if this picture in particular does work this way, but yeah, it's better than nothing. Effectively, what we're having in AI governance right now is a transition from principles to practice, right? And this transition seems to focus on the things that are easiest to fix, right? And there's the topics that are the easiest to fix. Obviously, from a legal perspective, is kind of the product regulation. So this is definitely the case with the EU AI Act, right? So this European Commission legislation proposal that has been put forward, and as a result, because they focus on this product safety kind of framework, which is more about like whether the users like are directly impacted by the AI system or that kind of thing, we are actually seeing a certain focus on the post deployment and on the direct problems / the negative internalities, right? So this lower right green.
Nicolas, we cannot hear you anymore.
Actually shift towards issues that, sorry?
We couldn't hear you, I guess, for like few seconds, maybe 10 seconds.
This is my Wi-Fi acting up. I'm so sorry about that.
You're back.
So I was saying, like, for us, the main issue is therefore, like, because it seems like policymakers are already actively working on this side of this quadrant of the issue. Like, it would be exceptional if you could start working as well on all these aspects of negative externalities and this aspect of pre-deployment issues, right? So the negative externalities, to give you an example, is the fact that recommender systems like Facebook as on its own as leaded, like people who are not using Facebook are also affected by what's happening with Facebook when they see like a protest out of there, or like I'm taking Facebook again just as an example. There are many other companies that are using recommender systems which also have negative externalities, but like Brussels yesterday had a massive protest that was like that was also the result, or to a certain extent, of an exacerbation and like the polarization of society that can come from the use of recommender systems, or the abuse of recommender system by some malicious agent. Well, this is the kind of stuff that a lot of people in Brussels have been affected by the negative externalities of an AI system. The recommender systems will be governed. So this is already like kind of a win. They will be governed in the Digital Service Act of the European Commission, which is probably a good thing, but there are other negative externalities, such as the fragility of the energy grid, the opacity of the systems that rely heavily on automated decision making. We mentioned earlier, like this breast cancer screening program in the UK, that where the scheduling algorithm was like so enmeshed in so many different systems that for years nobody noticed that it was actually forgetting systematically a cohort of citizens who were meant to be screened. Right, this is the kind of negative externalities. Regardless whether you are okay to be subjected to an AI system, you just end up having your life affected by it, and this is not yet governed by any of these acts at this stage, by any of these legal acts. And then in terms of the pre-deployment questions, these are more the questions about like accidental use. So you might remember Microsoft putting out this Twitter bots, or like on the Chinese Weibo, there was a bot, like an artificially intelligent bot that was still, it was not a product per se, right? It wasn't commercialized per se, but it was still accessible kind of in form of beta testing, and that bot like quickly turned into the equivalent of probably like an extreme, like skinhead white nationalists, and that would producing comments that were absolutely unacceptable and had to be banned from the platform where it was. So these are pre-deployment issue, where the issues that arise when you are testing your AI systems, and of course, like the test of AI system currently, like generally, as I mentioned on Gathertown earlier, like could lead to minor issues, such as burning up your computer, right? Like because you did not properly run it. But it could also lead to, as a pre-deployment issue, it could lead to further the wrong beta system, or a prototyping that really like breaks the whole supply chain, or that breaks the entire financial market, right? And in which case, like you combine both the pre-deployment and the negative externalities, which is something that currently policymakers are not dealing with. So to me, like these three other quadrants are the big challenges of AI governance for the next 5 to 10 years. But there are solutions to it. We can get into that.
Well, Nicolas, thank you so much. You literally put your workshop into practice here, yes. And with such readiness as well. Like, thank you for explaining that. Yeah, Lassana, I see your hand up. And also, if anyone wants to reply to any of the comments raised by other speakers, use your hands for that as well. Feel free to do that. Lassana, floor to you.
Yeah. So Nicolas's discussion actually kind of reminded me of a few things that we're working on here and that I wanted to touch on. So connected to kind of opacity of systems, one of the greatest challenges that we've identified is kind of the mistrust of community members of AI systems to actually do or support in governance, and then even helping direct and indirect stakeholders gain greater clarity about exactly how these AI systems are working. And so one of the things we do here to kind of support in that is that whenever we hold our sessions, we try to find the 1 to 2 minute video clips that explain the promise and perils of different AI applications, and also whenever available, cartoons, cartoon strips. And so the purpose of using those actually, and we found them to be very effective, is that actually lowers the bar to entry to the conversation, because we find when we bring different communities together, people are at different places in their familiarity with the terms and terminologies and applications of AI in society, and this helps to bring people to a central point where they can all contribute to the conversation. That being said, there have been found it's very difficult to find media artifacts that explain particularly the black box portion of AI, right? There's some some low level explanations that show you how it works, but when it gets down to the nitty gritty, that's where we've really struggled to find resources to be able to help people in the community at different levels of understanding to fully comprehend the value, and kind of remove some of the mistrust they have around AI's ability to support in governance.
Thank you, Lassana, for the thorough reply. Definitely, I echo many of these points. I see that Stephan wants to add something, and then Nicolas on the line as well.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce indeed what Lassana was referring to, which is the one of the risks is a whole range of asymmetries that are existing. Asymmetries between indeed the broader public and actually those that are designing and implementing AI as it relates to information asymmetries. I mean, a lot of what is actually really happening is not known to the broader public or understood in a manner that allows for a more informed and sophisticated deliberation. And as a result, what we have worked on a lot is how do we then get the social license for actually applying some of those technologies in ways that might impact their lives. And I think we need to do a lot more investment in actually acquiring the social license, but that needs to go beyond consent, for instance, in disclosing their data, or some kind of binary discussions, are you for or against, where typically it's in most cases those answers will be, well, it depends. And then we need to have the tools and the insight to determine what it depends means, so they actually have a sophisticated and trusted way of going about this. But there are other asymmetries that create risks. One asymmetry, in addition to the information asymmetry, actually knowing what happens and being able to engage on the issues at hand, are of course data asymmetries. And we see indeed that the fact that there is a big distinction between those that have data and those that need data to leverage that data in the public interest, we see that distinction and that divide is getting bigger and bigger every day. And as a result, those that have data are capable of actually developing certain kinds of AI applications. And as a result, it creates new power asymmetries as a result of data asymmetries, and as a result, of course, asymmetries with regard to having access to some of the expertise that exists. And I think too often we focus on clearly risks such as bias as a result, right, by the way, of data asymmetries, but we also should focus on power asymmetries that are quite often linked to data asymmetries, which in itself then create intelligence asymmetries, i.e. those that actually have access to the intelligence and those that don't have access to the intelligence. And as a result, it creates some kind of a unequal access to insight that could, if distributed more equally, could benefit society at large. And here I'm also thinking not just about asymmetries among companies, but also even asymmetries across countries, right? And we will see the divide that already exists probably becoming bigger because some countries will have access to the tools, the data, and the expertise, and others won't. And as a result, you will actually reinforce some of the divides that might be out there. So the whole concept of asymmetries is, from my point of view, quite often understudied. We need to come up with a taxonomy of those asymmetries. We need to understand what are their risks and implications of not tackling them. And subsequently, we need to also making sure that this is more distributed, more transparent, and ultimately somewhat create a level playing field here.
Thank you so much, Stephan. Nicolas, you wanted to add something.
Sorry, this is for the latest question actually that came up. Should I, because it's links. There is a nice segue into like the social license.
Is it the second one, right?
No, that's the
last one.
Let me check the last one. Yes, for robust ethical global structuring, how are you also engaging with global southern conceptualizations of AI and digital governance? Question from
you.
Yes. So yeah, there again, I think this is an excellent question, Paul, and like the Future Society has been working, as I mentioned, with the Global Partnership on AI in order to kind of help them determine what should be their agenda, and during that work, a lot of our research focused notably on like analyzing the current landscape of responsible AI. And again, a picture being worth 1,000 words. I'm really sorry about that, but like I just happen to have the file accessible here online. But our research has shown that of all the initiatives, the responsible AI initiative that we identify, like over 214, only 1.4% was from Africa, only 7% from Latin America, right? And this is something like the compared to the population in there, like there is a massive skew away from lower income / developing countries, and this is a major problem. So the worst thing is that out of like the only 5 out of the 179 initiatives that are about AI and ethics, compared to AI and ethics and AI governance, compared to AI for social good, which is often like AI for development model, only 5 out of 179 initiatives are actually from the lower income countries, right? So this is the type of research that we did in order to encourage the Global Partnership on AI, which is this kind of G7 initiative to govern artificial intelligence collectively, and which has, as its name indicates, like the ambition to be global. We wanted to encourage them to bring more countries from the what was the term, global southern countries with global southern conceptualization of AI, if I remember the question correctly. Well, we wanted to encourage them to bring more. Unfortunately, our advice has not been heeded yet. We're still working tirelessly with the Global Partnership on AI to make sure that it remains in that it continues to go in a direction that is more inclusive rather than exclusive, as has been the case so far, and that is an important bit. This is just like to bring some data to this question as well. But I'm curious to hear from the others as well. What work you have?
Yeah, if anyone wants to add on the question, I'm going to read it again. For robust ethical global structuring, how are you also engaging with global southern conceptualizations of AI and digital governance? I see, Andrew, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Marta. And I think Stephan already touched on it a bit at the start on how we really focused in the Global Perspectives course on bringing diverse perspectives and experience to the table through those trainings and those lectures. But I think also to Nicolas's point, we have a bit of data in terms of our AI localism repository, in terms of where different initiatives and interventions are being deployed globally. And what we see is that there is quite a bit of clustering of current practice, at least in our sample, which we wouldn't claim to be fully comprehensive, but we see clustering in North America, Europe, and Central Asia, and to a somewhat lesser extent in East Asia and the Pacific, which is maybe not a surprise today, and might be something that we need to focus on doing some more fact finding in those other areas in the global South. But I think one thing that's notable in our work is that we've seen a number of international initiatives that have been launched to create networks of global cities and to enable knowledge sharing and peer learning and transfer between different parts of the world. So I think that's something that we're eager to keep an eye on, and how that kind of global initiative and convening stakeholders and decision makers in cities around the world on again, what works best in practice and how we can learn from current experience and current practice to move toward more sustainable, systematic and responsible types of AI uses should be something to keep an eye on in the next year or so as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Lassana, you want to add something?
Yeah, so I want to say at the Tech Policy Lab right now, we're not doing anything, or excuse me, at least in the work that I'm doing. But what I wanted to add to that is that I think as a community or society, we need to find meaningful ways to engage with the Global South and support them in articulating their conceptualizations, right? When I say that, what I mean is that when we're engaging with them, that we're not doing it in a way that suppresses their natural conceptualizations of it in favor or encouraging them to accept the Western conceptualizations of AI ethics and what that might look like. Sorry, I got children in the background.
No worries, no worries. And no problem if that happens. We've had it also yesterday in the call. They're welcome to share their opinion as well, of course. And thank you for your intervention. And Maria, would you like to add anything?
Thank you. Yeah, so as Lassana said, we currently have no projects with the Global South, but as a personal experience, as a researcher from the Global South, from Colombia, I do feel like there is something related to what Lassana said, which is that sometimes in places like Colombia, for example, the agenda is being set by organizations, and by organizations, I mean research centers, but also international organizations and multilateral banking organizations, by them, even though it is for places in the Global South. So that's, of course, really relevant and important in the sense that that brings along, it comes along with a lot of funding, but also it risks the fact of leaving aside the contextual perspectives of the people that are implementing and developing AI in the different countries in Latin America, etc. So that's a thing that, as someone else said, has to be taken into account whenever we want to help the organizations and the government in the Global South to develop their own policies, always having to account the contextual perspectives of the people that live there and understand AI in a different way.
Very valuable contribution. Thank you. Thank you, both of you, really. And Stephan, yeah, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Maria and Lassana. And so, and again, meaning we have a variety of initiatives, including around COVID-19, where we worked with a variety of African centers on how they could use data and AI. And then we set up an exchange among those actors, whether they were from Cote d'Ivoire to Nigeria, and so on. And just having that kind of platform where they can exchange experiences within their own continent was already useful to actually develop some kind of a unique perspective on that as well. But one of the initiatives that we also recently launched is around digital self-determination. And I think that also relates to having a more local and community-based way, because by self, we don't mean just the individual, right? The self could be the community, it could be the locality, or it could be, anyway, a community of interest. But we do need to come up with new ways to actually provide them for more autonomy on how they use digital tools, including AI, including, for instance, digital identity, but also data in its own right. And from our point of view, we actually really don't have, again, beyond quite often notions of consent or notions of anyway, where you basically can push politicians to act, but we don't have a real agile way of actually developing those self-deterministic kind of approaches. And I think that's another area that we need a lot more work, including, of course, and that means not just the global south, but also in the, the global north, but especially also in the global south, where quite often this empowerment of actually being able to determine how technology is being implemented is lacking.
Thank you so much, Stephan. And Paul from the audience said that he loves the visuals, I guess, because we shared your link with them, guys. So it's a compliment from his side. And thank you. We keep on sharing all the links. So if any association wants to share any link as well, we will make sure to give them, to hand them on to the audience. Feel free. There was a question that we jumped, and I think so far we've talked about the divide a little bit between global north, global south, and now there's another sort of dimension that comes into play that I think you touched upon also in your presentations, and it's the one about the balance between the local and the global. And I think this question addresses it. It is, are there any practical examples of AI governance that successfully integrates the local and the global that you might have come across? And if not, do you have any idea of how this could look like?
So I think that I might not have a visual for this one, but there is there is definitely in the early days, and I think this is also something that when we talked about collective intelligence at the beginning, something that was necessary in the early days of like the governance of AI. A lot of this was about trying to understand what is the situation for everyone, right? And so the Future Society in particular has been created in order to carry out a project of the global civic debate on artificial intelligence and its impact on society. And this was really a fundamental type of work where, the purpose was to really bring individuals from all over the world there, and individuals who are not, part of the policy community, but individuals who are not part of academics or anything, like really like trying to get to the consumer of this technology, or to the user or the citizen affected by these technologies. And the overall, something that we learned early on from that is that the interpretation of what AI means to somebody in Russia, in like rural Russia, is actually very, very different from the interpretation of what it means for somebody based in London, right? It is actually something where, the local, if we consider the local as the individual situations, that is very important to have that in mind, rather than like, of course, cities face different challenges. I am sure that Santiago de Chile is facing very different challenges than Brussels right now, and that is very important to have that. But like, I think it's also beyond local. It's almost like going to the individual level. That is an important aspect to it, because the individual level will also have to reflect the local in his or her experience.
Thank you, Nicolas. Even without the visuals, it was all very clear. And Andrew, I think you wanted to jump in.
Sure. So I think that, in terms of, it's a bit early days to say that anything has been successful per se, but I think that we are seeing some of this, the intention of transferring some of that global insight into the local level and vice versa. So like I mentioned a minute ago, we've seen a number of these global networks and alliances being formed, which both enable that transfer of knowledge down to the local level where different experiments can be deployed, but also feeding the lessons learned back into a global evidence base that can then be tapped into in various ways. We've also seen some of these global alliances creating things like model projects and templates that can then be deployed in different areas in terms of AI governance, and then monitoring how well they work in practice and get a sense of what some of those, to some of the earlier discussion, some of those contextual differences and considerations might be, so that we can start to understand some of the variables at play that might impact the success or failure of a particular governance approach. So I think that having some of this connectivity amongst actors working at the local level could be one important way to transfer some of that knowledge from the global to the local, but also from the local to the global.
Nice. Lassana, did you wanted to add something? Or maybe not, because he's unmuted.
Oh, no, not at the moment, just still listening.
Then Maria, please, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I'm seeing this process as an iterative one, in the sense that it's very interesting how you see global initiatives in terms of principles. There are a lot of ethical principles that were first drafted. Then you begin to see local initiatives that go forward, not only in terms of ethical principles, but now they are formulating policy and law on different issues like facial recognition or use of automatic decision-making in government. And then you see the response again in the national or even global level, when you see things as the Bill of Rights for an AI-powered world that is being discussed in the US, or the regulation on AI that is discussed on Europe, or even bigger, the recommendations on AI that were published last week by the UNESCO. So I believe that it's an iterative process, and they are both like responding to each other. Of course, they have different principles, but I think that we are all pointing in the same way, both in the global level, in the local level, and in terms of ethics or principles, and also in terms of policy and law.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I can imagine it as a sort of conversation as well, this iteration. That's very, very telling. And Stephan, you would like to add something?
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize that there is a large confusion about what is the appropriate jurisdiction, right? And what is appropriate, and first of all, what can cities do as it relates to AI governance is not well understood. And the fact that they actually have the potential to establish rules and policies and approaches is quite often not well developed. And two, what is also quite often not well understood is what is appropriate at the local level and what should be really developed at the global level. And typically at the global level, from my point of view, there are clearly three areas that should be developed at the global and then translated at the local. The first one is areas where coordination, technical coordination is needed, such as, for instance, standards or at least an understanding on if you have fragmentation, it might actually undermine the use of AI for the social good. And that could be, as I said, it could be standards, it could be also even frameworks to understand how you audit in a common way certain kinds of applications. The second area is really when it comes to managing common resources. And here, I think at the global level, it's going to become more and more important to really try to think about, do we need common computational resources for actually providing access so that we don't have that kind of divide? Because again, I talked about asymmetries. It's not just asymmetries on data and intelligence, there's also quite often asymmetries on actually access to computational power. And there might be need for some global approaches to having global resources available. And that's something that might be needed. And then the third area, typically where global governance is appropriate, is if you have common rights that you want and principles that you want to advance. And those could be the human rights principles. And I think it is really important to indeed have a global approach to human rights as it relates to AI. Now, that then, of course, requires then translation at the local level. And I haven't seen, frankly, that much activity. I mean, we have documented, but quite often it's actually what we have documented as a result of absence of global action where the local are stepping in, not because they feel like they need to translate the global into the local. It's more of, anyway, we don't see anything that is helpful here, so let's do it ourselves. But I think the principle of subsidiarity, which within a European context is pretty well established, is going to be important to monitor on how is that going to be implemented within the AI context. And like AI, and Nicolas gave this wonderful visual to show that the AI Act is really all about exposed, right? And documenting risk after the fact. But even there, I don't see how, anyway, the discussion about how that act will be implemented using subsidiarity principles, right? It's still very much artificial that this is going to be global without actually understanding that this needs to be done. And this evaluation, by the way, of risk will have to be done at the local level. And I think we need a lot more work in that space as well.
Thank you so much. If no one wants to add anything on this point, there is another question I see, and it is, do you think there is a way to make AI governance frameworks truly inclusive, maybe elaborating more on what collective intelligence or the diverse voice methods that were mentioned can bring to the table?
Hey, I'm happy to start us off in this conversation. First thing, based on my experience with diverse voices methods and convening different experiential groups and providing feedback to policymakers, I would say having a totally inclusive framework is very, very difficult, if not impossible. And the reason for that is that certain values always take priority or tend to take priority over others. What the method has been able to do, at least, is document all of the stakeholders' perspectives, point of views, particularly on how particular implementations can negatively impact their life experience, and then give the decision makers the opportunity to consider that as they make their final decisions. And it's sort of a satisfying but unsatisfying answer, right? Because we want to, our goal is to create something that all stakeholders will be really satisfied with. But we found that to be quite difficult. I'm going to give you an example, not immediately in the AI space, but we had ran a series of diverse voices sessions on driverless cars, and one of the experiential communities that we convened was people living in extreme poverty, and during that session, we had provided them with a document ahead of time discussing this, and then when they arrived, we showed them some videos on the promise and peril of driverless cars. And during the discussion portion, one of the things that came out, for example, was that some of the policies being put forth, like higher gas taxes or higher penalties for moving violations or parking violations, disproportionately impacted that community because some of them lived in their cars, for example. Right, some of them had larger size families, and so this model of driverless cars really didn't work for them. Right, but when we went back to the author, he acknowledged that that was something that did exist, and he validated it, but wasn't willing to make to make a stand for some of those points. Right, so yeah.
Thank you, Lassana. So nice. Thank you for contextualizing that. That's very interesting. The project of diverse voices that you just mentioned. Like, wow. And Nicolas, you have your hands up.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I'll have a similarly pessimistic approach about making AI governance frameworks really inclusive, but perhaps also from another factor, more like in the engineering process. Let's imagine the full technological stack to have like an inclusive debate. Like you're gonna need. Okay, let's start with an illustration for this. I was working with UNESCO on AI ethics, and as part of this group, like some of my colleagues on that group were actually based in Afghanistan, right, in early 2021, and every meeting about trying to define AI ethics was basically disrupted, or not even like it was not possible for these members or this representative from Afghanistan to connect, either because, like, first of all, there is power, right? At the very beginning you need power to generate some form of electricity, right? Like then for electricity grids to be stable enough to maintain that. Once you have that, you need to have the telecoms that is sufficient, and then you need to have the data to support like the phone, right? And always, like, either the power cut, either the network being cancelled, like always that disrupted quite a lot of the work that we did, right? Then beyond that, like after you know, like you know what happened in Afghanistan over this year, this has been absolutely impossible, right? There's been like obviously more pressing issues at stake, and this is maybe something like for any form of governance framework to be truly inclusive, we're going to have to fix a lot of infrastructural problems, but also a lot of institutional problems, such as the conflict and right. So I do see the value of inclusiveness in these aspects. It's very important that we try to enable this inclusiveness. Oh, and I'm being told that I've disconnected again. Really sorry about that. Basically, I don't know where you lost me.
It's like this time it wasn't that bad. We never totally lost you. We lost you a little bit, but it was like 1 second, and then
okay. Cool. Well, then that is fine. But so what I mean is that there are a whole range of issues that we should fix, not only because it makes the life of people better, but because it enables them to actively engage on this collective intelligence or these diverse voice methods for global governance as well, right? Like to finally have fixing these global problems, or these problems that are faced globally, be it AI, be it climate change, be it like all questions of like health that we are facing right now, and how to advance towards pandemic preventions. These issues will require fixing, like the infrastructure for the people to be able to engage with that. And you know, we are far from this. And yes, okay, actually, let me maybe be a bit more optimistic than I said. Like, there is a way to make AI governance frameworks truly inclusive, and it will be to actually make sure that everything is in place so that everyone has the luxury of time to dive into the importance, to train themselves to understand the important implications that AI has in this space. But yeah, so it's possible. It's extremely hard though, and it's going to take a lot of work over the next 20 to 30 years, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Andrew. Oh, Lassana, you want to add something?
Yeah, just one more thing. So one of another kind of like tangible example is in the US in particular, there have been uses of AI to like determine whether or not someone is at risk of committing a criminal offense, and to determine whether or not someone should be detained, or released. Right. So on that side of the governance, it's targeted at civilians, right? But so in terms of having something fully inclusive, it might also mean creating AI systems that assess or that provide some sort of similar metrics for actual law enforcement professionals, right? And you know, we can imagine a world where perhaps that might be used to determine where to send particular officers, to what sort of calls particular officers should be sent to, right? Or how to deal with disciplinary issues or methods, right? But again, it requires, in order to be inclusive, we need to have all stakeholders willing to be governed, right? Or to be governed with support of AI, right? And so again, like, in terms of like power, and that just seems to be very difficult. Again, not impossible, but very difficult.
Thank you, Lassana. And Andrew, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. And I know that we have another question in the chat and not a lot of time, but just briefly on this point of inclusivity. And Stephan mentioned earlier that a lot of our work in this space is kind of built around the question of how do you gain a social license for this work, rather than prioritizing a fully comprehensive consent-based approach to responsible data handling, which might not be workable in practice for a number of reasons. But one of the projects that we did in a slightly different context is something called the Data Assembly, where we hosted the first citizens assembly around the reuse of data, in this case focused on COVID-19 in New York City. But the methodology that we established and that we're applying in other places is really built around, to Lassana's point, the kind of stakeholder identification and engagement, and then a structured and tangible kind of discussion around design principles and governance decision-making processes. So all that to say, rather than opening the doors to a broad engagement with any and every type of person, self-selection of participants and the like, we took a more mini public type approach to these consultations around data reuse in COVID-19. So identifying some of the key stakeholder groups are in that context, being data holders in the private sector, policymakers, the general public, but also then representatives from advocacy groups and civic rights organizations and people who can represent and speak to some of those unique perspectives and considerations that might come into play, whether they be people, homeless communities, or immigrants, or other groups that might not be participating in an open call for the general public. But then through these different mini public engagements, it's possible to actually get into the nuance of specific examples. So again, instead of saying, what would your suggestions be for governing AI more effectively, you can have a discussion that has tangible examples and getting into some of the decision-making around who, what, why, when, and where different governance interventions could be designed and deployed, can actually move toward a more workable and sophisticated type of engagement with folks, and move beyond the type of thumbs up or thumbs down, which might not be all that useful in practice in terms of changing the way that we operate and governing more effectively in a way that's more aligned with citizen perspectives and preferences.
Thank you, Andrew. I think, Stephan, you want to add something. Go ahead.
Yeah, just adding, and I'm not elaborating what Andrew said, but just adding is that in the past I did a lot of work around internet governance, and it's the same kind of discussion about how do we make internet governance more inclusive. And one area, of course, that we need to bring to the AI governance space is this whole area of procedural equity, by which I mean making sure that when agendas are set, that is done in an equitable way. When governance approaches are designed, that this is done as an equitable way, but also review and then subsequently implementation. Because quite often AI or governance is seen as if it's one thing. Well, it's actually a series of interventions and moments in time when decisions are made, and thinking through how can you do this in a procedural equity way, so that, for instance, the chair of the working group is not always from the same kind of hemisphere, or that the agenda is not always determined by the same kind of advocacy groups. And so having that kind of approach might be more important. Now, responding to the question with regard to the Brussels effect, it's going to be interesting to see, of course, whether the AI Act will achieve that. I'm really concerned that the AI Act will actually have the opposite effect, and that we will see the creation of more AI havens in order to respond to the burdens that the AI Act sets up on companies. I think we will see many companies move to AI havens, where actually they don't have that kind of burden of risk management and risk evaluation, which, by the way, is very subjective quite often. And so that might actually be the opposite effect than what we hope could happen. And I think we do need to anticipate that.
Yeah, thank you for replying to the question. In fact, if anyone wants to take this as well, I am going to just read it out loud. Do you think the AI Act will have a similar Brussels effect like the GDPR had? Can you elaborate on the effect that the AI Act might have on AI governance around the world? And I see Nicolas already touched upon the AI Act in the workshop, and who's in Brussels. So please go ahead, Nicolas.
Yeah, so building on what Stephan just said, indeed, like the key challenge for policymakers right now is to avoid creating something that would then just like end up being applied to the EU, right? So there is this Brussels effect, as I don't know who has asked the questions, but like the Brussels effect is basically this notion that the regulations that are being decided in the EU would then be applied and enforced abroad. The way this actually work is like there are three ways. There are two ways that are very documented, like the de jure effect, where the regulator from, let's say, Canada decides like, okay, the EU has decided to do that. Let's copy paste this article into our own legislation, or this whole chapter of legislation into our own legislation in order for us to have a compatible cyberspace. There is the de facto effect, which is something that is a bit more about like the companies themselves, like big multinationals that have to adapt their products for like the EU market, will then decide, well, actually, since we have already set up all the processes to comply with the EU market, and since like, you know, this is something that we might as well sell the same products abroad as well, and therefore de facto you end up preserving the rules being applied on products taking place in the other markets. And then there is the third one that is not really mentioned often, but like there is this cultural effect, let's say, whereby, or like definitional effect, I don't know, it's something that I have noticed myself, but I haven't seen it documented yet. It's like the fact that the act will define key concepts such as like robustness and accuracy. For the first time, it will have to be defined in a legal way, in a legally stringent way. And this is the kind of stuff that even if it's not taken up like explicitly by companies or by regulators abroad, it might actually be taken up as a way of thinking. Oh, we define robustness this way now. You know, it's been the same way like private data. In 1986, the OECD kind of defined private data, and the same definition has been applied everywhere relevant, and in a way that has shaped discussions on privacy like never before. So there's three effects might be at play with the AI Act. I do think that it will have the same effect. There will be a lot of fighting about like the balance of this AI Act, right? Because the requirements that are put onto industry are for a very limited scope, right? Even though everyone says that it's for like all AI and they define AI very broadly, actually what we see is that yes, they define AI very broadly, but then in the few articles next to that, they basically like limit the application of this regulation to a very few use cases, perhaps like 55 use cases, even though we can count probably like 10,000 use cases in the world right now. They have like these very limited applications or like applicative scope. The last thing is that like GDPR's Brussels effect has not always been positive, right? Like we have to bear in mind that some of the bad aspects of the AI Act might spread as well, so we should be careful about it.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the floor for the last intervention by Maria. Andrew had to drop off, but he thanks everyone so much. He thanks everyone for a very stimulating conversation and for having him, and nice to meet everyone. So, but Maria, first, like the last intervention to you.
Thank you. Very brief. I think it's very early to anticipate where we're going to have this Brussels effect, but I can anticipate that we'll have an agenda setting effect, because all around the world, we're going to start to discuss, and we are already doing it, AI in terms of legal frameworks, not only ethical principles. And I think that we're going to be discussing if the risk-based approach that is being proposed in Europe is the best one, or if there are other approaches that could take the lead on legal frameworks. That would be it.
Yeah, very true. We shouldn't start off on assumptions, let's say, especially when we go into law, definitely. And Thank you very much, everybody. We were doubting whether, to go for 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, and in the end we covered very swiftly the 1 hour and a half. So it was a very stimulating, intense discussion. Thank you so much for being here, for engaging with each other as well. I hope the public enjoyed it as well, the attendees in GatherTown. We made sure to share all the websites with them, and please do stick around for you, the speakers, if you want in GatherTown in the next days. If you have to drop off and you are very late for a meeting, go ahead. I'm just going to quickly share my screen to share to the audience what's next, and then I'm gonna let everyone go. So here it's what's next. So we are exactly halfway through the conference by now. Next up is, after a break, is Nicolas Miai, the president of the Future Society, is going to come and talk to us about AI governance this evening, again in the lecture hall. So I'm excited to see all of you there. And then tomorrow instead is our last thematic day, let's say, which is going to be about AI ethics. Once again, paper session in the morning. We're going to have some artists from the Venice Biennale who are going to come and present their work. It's called the Catalog of the Post-Human, and I can really vouch for that. I was there at the Biennale, I saw their work, and it's a very nice critical art piece on the future of work. Then we're going to have a workshop on AI ethics by Jessica Morley, a colleague of mine at the Oxford Internet Institute. Then a roundtable on AI ethics, and another keynote speaker for the day, Abhishek Gupta from the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. Talking about an exercise in collective intelligence. We're going to have an exercise in collective intelligence on our last day, because we thought about using this conference as a sort of way for also our participants to sort of come out with their own ideas and their impressions about the conference. So on the last day, you're going to be able to actually speak your mind, leave an imprint, and that's going to turn out into a sort of common manifesto of this conference, which is going to be written by all of you, and it's going to be, of course, authored also by all of you. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you for all the associations. I'll now, guys, let you go to your busy days. And I want to thank you all. Bye-bye.